Hi, Lou here to talk about an important but rarely discussed aspect of games, their flexibility. Now, what do I mean by this? Primarily, I mean how easily can they be played to different lengths than the standard length, and how easily can they be played by differing numbers of players. Now, single-player video games mostly have a save game feature, so you can always stop and continue later, though you've not reached the end, the climax, the closure of the whole game. But online games involving other people can't be saved. You have to play all the way through. And many online games don't provide for an ending at some point before the end. And that's true of computer games in general. I'm more interested here in tabletop games, where some have to be played through to a defined end, but others work as partial plays. I hope it's obvious that flexibility is desirable, though not required in a design. The more flexibility, the broader the potential market, and the more value you provide for your customer. So, game length. Now, in many race games, we can stop before the end and go by who's ahead. This happens in big car races where there's a rain occurs after the race is halfway through or more, and they stop the race and whoever is ahead at that point wins. Britannia, Risk, and many other war games have to go all the way to the end in a contrast. Many point accumulation games allow for stopping partway through. Usually these are symmetric games where everybody is earning points at the same rate. This won't work with Britannia, though it's a point game, because the 4 different colors accumulate points at differing rates, because it's asymmetric. Also, if you're stopping partway through and there are strategies being followed, then cutting the game short is going to thwart some of the players. Now, many of my card game prototypes are the opposite of this. You can play to a time limit rather than a number of turns or exhaustion of the draw deck or whatever, and then tally the score. Whoever has the highest score wins. So, to generalize, board war games usually must go to the end. Card games can often go to a time limit. Point games in general are more amenable to being cut short. Symmetric point games work, not asymmetric. And also many Euro-style games and some war games have arbitrary stopping points. If they can be stopped at turn X, then why not stop at turn X minus 1 or X minus 2? It depends on the game, and again it depends partly on the strategies and how they play out. But one of the primary techniques that has been developed in Euro-style games for making the game shorter is simply to have it end at an arbitrary point of X number of turns. And if that's true, then we can consider playing fewer or more, even more turns. Now, number of players. Can the game be played by varying numbers and still work well? That last clause is very important. You can have a game that says it's for X number of players or 2 to 7 or whatever, but it won't work very well for the extremes. It might lose its character, or it might be a much weaker game. For example, playing a game for more than 2 players with only 2 players is often not very interesting. Certainly games like Diplomacy, Risk, and Britannia, and also many Euro games. They just they aren't interesting, even though the rules allow for that particular way of playing. So a flexible game not only has rules that allow for it, but the game itself still has the character that it has when it's played by the ideal number of players. On the other hand, games designed for 2 players are not going to work very well or at all for more than 2. Think about chess or strategio-style games. Playing those games for more than 2 players is almost certainly dominated by turtling. In other words, a player sits back and lets the other players fight and kill each other off. You have to design a game for more than 2 that is a conflict game to discourage turtling and to encourage activity. But when you design a two-player game, you don't have to design it that way because it's going to happen that way anyway. There's only one opponent. Now, in my case, one of my prototypes called Star Princess was originally for two, and it was tested that way, had lots of interesting scenarios. But then a new test group got hold of it, and they insisted on playing with 4 or 5. That resulted in a much longer game with player elimination, which is undesirable, and I've been trying to shorten it in various ways and avoid the player elimination. It's a game that has both a tactical and a strategic component, and that works for 2 players, but it doesn't work without a long game for more than 2. Now, there's another and less important aspect of flexibility, and that's can players join the game after it's already started. This is pretty rare. I have some games where it's practical, but they are symmetrical point games where the points are acquired fairly slowly, and they can also be played to a time limit. Why slowly? It's so that someone joining late has some chance of winning, that is, the other players won't have built up a big lead. This is very rare in a geographical board game, such as a war game, I'd say. It might be more practical where the board is only a status tracker. And how about the oddball case where a game lets you come back into the game as a new or different force when your old one is eliminated or nearly so? Of course, I think in terms of war games, and it's possible that this will happen in other games, but in non-war games, players tend not to be eliminated or nearly eliminated. In my game Germania, which is going to be published in the United Kingdom, is about Germanic tribes surviving and possibly prospering after the fall of the Roman Empire. Much of the danger comes from non-Germanic invaders who are controlled temporarily by one or another player. If a player's tribe falters, he or she can take over one of the invader factions. Now, I've seen a player do that 3 times in one game. They played a lot longer than the game was intended for because they were having a good time. Now, did he win? No. But he had a good time because he likes to cause mayhem and attack a lot. And so when he got exhausted with one force, he'd just take over one of the invaders and keep going. So we have 3 major aspects of flexibility. We have variable length, variable number of players, and players joining after the start. These are all good things, I think, and when you design a game, you can think about them even though they're not required. Thanks for listening.